Thank you, James. And hello, everyone. Hi. Or in my language, tālofa. Tālofa lava. So, in actual fact, James and I first met at a poetry gig at Saatchi and Saatchi on Fifth Avenue, right? And then we went to the underground weird little Brooklyn thing. Anyway, that's quite beside the point. So I'm really happy to be here today to address all of you. And I see we have quite a range of ages. So who thinks that they're the youngest person here? Yeah? You think you're the youngest? How old are you? You're 14? Anyone younger than 14?
Speak closer to the mic, please.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me better now?
That's better.
Okay. Okay, so you're 14. You win the prize for being the youngest person here. Who is the oldest person here? You're the oldest person here. And how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
No, 97.
97. Oh my gosh. That is amazing, and I hope when I grow up I can be 97 and in the front seat of a poetry talk. Fantastic. Fantastic, yeah. I'm very pleased to meet you. So where I come from, we always pay our respects to our elders. So I just want to pay respects to you as the oldest person in the room. So today, I think James mentioned I'm from New Zealand. Does everyone know where New Zealand is?
Yes.
You do? Do some of the younger people perhaps not know where New Zealand is?
It's by like Australia.
It is near Australia. In fact, it is the very last stop before you get to the South Pole, before you get to Antarctica. So it's pretty much the bottom of the world, next to the bottom of the world. So I've come a really long way to New York. We play cricket. This is true. Yes. I've come a long way. What was that?
In New Zealand, they play cricket.
We do. We do, because we were colonised by the British and they bought cricket. Anyway, I'll talk a little bit more about colonisation later. Now, how is my voice for everyone? Can everyone hear me okay? And how is my accent? Do you need me to speak slower? It's perfect. There was a young lady with her hand up. Oh, okay, it's my eyes. Okay, so everyone can understand me, everyone can hear me. I think we're ready to go, right? Okay. So today I want to speak to you as a sister poet to Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Across the centuries, across the divides of culture and privilege, and across the thousands of miles of the vast Pacific Ocean between Samoa, and I'm going to give you the correct pronunciation, it's Samoa, okay? So I'm going to call it Samoa and Samoans from here on out, so you know what I'm talking about. So between Samoa, New Zealand, Britain, and New York City. Today I'm asking you to join me in imagining Elizabeth Barrett Browning as my sister poet, and her words as advice, as anchors, as guidelines and lifelines. We all need guidelines in this world, and those of us who are drowning desperately need lifelines. This is my meditation on her words. So, from a Samoan girl from New Zealand, from brown girls to Browning. First, let me give you a little bit of background on where I'm from. Samoa is a small Pacific island. Have you all heard of Samoa? You all have? No, some people haven't. So, for those young people, you all know who The Rock is, right? You all know Dwayne Johnson. He is Samoan. Yay, we love him. For those of you who don't know where Samoa is, it is about 2,000 kilometres from New Zealand, maybe that's like 1,000 miles, in the South Pacific. And it's close to the other South Pacific islands like Fiji, which you may have heard of. Okay. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context. So as I said, Samoa is a small Pacific Island nation, and the population is about 200,000. So really tiny. What's the population of New York City? 8 million.
8 million.
Okay, so the whole population of Samoa, of my country, could probably fit into a suburb here, maybe. But it's kind of prettier, I've got to say, than a suburb. Palm trees, blue sea, that kind of thing. So, some history. Starting in the 1940s and 50s, there was a large migration of Samoans to New Zealand. Now, I don't know how much you know about New Zealand, but it was colonised by the British a century beforehand, and it became Britain's furthest outpost. As I said, New Zealand is the last stop before the South Pole. And like colonised countries, Britain suppressed the indigenous people, known as the Māori of New Zealand. After World War II, there was an economic boom. New Zealand needed cheap labour to work in the factories and do the jobs that all the white New Zealanders didn't want to do. So they called on their closest and poorest neighbours in the South Pacific, the Samoans and people from Tonga and Fiji and the Cook Islands and other Pacific islands came to New Zealand to work, and along with them came my dad. I am of the first generation of New Zealand-born Samoans. Samoans now make up a really sizable group in New Zealand. I think they're about the third biggest ethnic group. So we have multiplied. So that's a very quick history lesson on where Samoans sit in New Zealand and where I sit in that milieu. So I've come to New York City, as James said, with my play called Wild Dogs Under My Skirt. Do you like that? Do you like that name? It sounds good, doesn't it? And it's a play about, yes, darling. No, nothing, just stretching. Okay. It's a play about Samoan women. And Samoan, remember Samoan?
Oh,
yeah,
right,
it's a play about Samoan women. And in a wider sense, it's also about love and abuse and survival and spirits and sisterhood and politics and rage and race. All the things that poets have been writing about for centuries. So now back to Elizabeth Barrett Browning, because those Browning people are probably wondering where I'm going. So here is where I'm going. Now, for those of you who are new to Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and I spoke to a young man in the back and I said to him, have you ever heard of Elizabeth Barrett Browning? And he said no. So that's great. It's great to have some people here who are completely new. Are people are some of the young people feeling brave enough to put their hands up and tell me if they've ever read any of Elizabeth Barrett Browning or even heard of her? Yeah, I got a shake of the head. Okay, so some people here are really new and some people here are total experts. So we're from 14 to 97, so we're going to talk right across the spectrum. Okay, so Elizabeth Barrett Browning. You may not have heard of her, some of you young people, but you probably have heard at least this first line from the poem that I'm going to read to you. And I would say it's probably the most famous, one of the most famous love poems in the English language. And it goes like this. Sonnet 43. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach, when feeling out of sight to the ends of being an ideal grace. I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need, by sun and candlelight. I love thee freely, as men strive for right. I love thee purely, as they turn from praise. I love thee with a passion put to use in my old griefs, with my childhood's faith. I love thee with a love I seemed to lose with my lost saints. I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life. And if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death. So this is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to break down some of this, maybe for some of you in a way that perhaps you haven't heard it. So Elizabeth Barrett Browning wrote this to her lover, her beloved husband, Robert Browning. But for my meditation today, because I'm kind of doing a meditation today, this is a poem I'm going to address not to a lover or a beloved, but to myself. And I invite you to do the same. So this poem is aspirational for me. This is a poem I read to myself as a beacon, as a way through this life, as a guide when things feel rough. And a reminder that above all else, I am my own beloved. And here, from Elizabeth Barrett Browning across the centuries, is some advice on how to love myself. So who needs some advice on how to love themselves? Yeah. Okay, so let me break it down for you. So I'm going to just take 5 lines of this poem and I'm going to read it to myself. So maybe in your head you can go, I love thee, I love me. How should I love me? So as I read this, I read it to myself. I also read it to the women and the men and those of other genders like me. I read it to my Samoan sisters, to my Pacific Islander sisters, to my sisters of colour, to my poet sisters, to all humans who have passion, who suffer, who experience emotion, intense desire, need and enthusiasm. And I particularly read it for the 14-year-old and for the 97-year-old. So I'm going to focus on 5 lines today of Sonnet 43 as they speak to me. I'd like to open them to you in the way that they opened themselves to me. So, as you know, I'm a poet, and one thing that I've learned is this. When I write a poem, or if I speak out a poem, when they leave the page, when they leave my mouth, and they make their way into the hands and hearts and minds and mouths of readers, my poem stops being my poem and it becomes the reader's. To experience in your own way, to add to your specific life, to see through your own eyes. And as I've also experienced as a poet, reading reviews of my poetry, analyses of my poetry, essays about my poetry, even MA theses about my poetry, my experience of my poem, whatever it was that I meant when I wrote the poem, doesn't always land the same way. As a poet, I've got to learn to let go of control. Who has a problem with control? Control freaks?
Oh,
No.
Don't like people control.
Yeah, there is that too. And for those of us who are control freaks, and many poets are, we have to learn how to let go of that poem and let the reader make it their own. And this is what I'm doing with Sonnet 43. So as I said, once a poem travels a distance to another human being, those poems are like my beloved children who leave home. And as a poet, I must allow those poems to have their own lives, to make their own relationships with people in the outside world, even if those relationships are ones I don't agree with. Even if the outside world sees my poem children in a way I did not create them to be. So as a poet, I must let go. Let the poem and the reader run off together and have their own love affair. And so today, I run off with Elizabeth Barrett Browning's famous poem, and I tell you about my relationship with it. How do I love thee? This is the question she poses. Let me account for myself. So I think you have the sonnet there in front of you, right, on the handout. So you can, I'm going to look at line 9 to line 13, I think. There's 14 lines in a sonnet, right? Okay, so from line 9 to line 14. So you can just count down to line 9. I'm going to read it anyway, so you can just listen if you don't feel like reading. I love thee with the passion put to use in my own griefs and with my childhood's faith. I love thee with the passion put to use in my old griefs. Passion comes from the Latin root pati, or suffer. The Buddha said, life is suffering, and he wasn't joking. Put your hand up, or give me a wave or a shout if you are 14 or 15 or 16 or somewhere around that age. Put your hands up. I want to see you. Okay, I can see you. I'm guessing, from the look of you, from the feel of you, you've already had a good amount of suffering, right, in your life. Yes. Have you had suffering in your life? Yes. You have. If you've put your hand up, if you have never felt suffering. Anyone? Never felt suffering. That's a shame, because I was going to ask that person to give us all some advice. Never mind. Because we need lessons, right? We need lessons. We need someone to help us along the way. So from the time we were born, we gather suffering. We gather emotion of every type. And the tough ones, the grief, the fear, the anger, the sadness, they often get locked up inside us, stuffed down, frozen into immovable blocks, or they rage at anything that moves. They grab passerbys by the neck and beat them up to a pulp. They howl at the moon. They crawl shivering into corners, or they weep openly in the street. I love thee with the passion put to use in my own griefs. What do you do with your passion, with your suffering? How do you use it? What happens to it? Well, a lot of us funnel our passion, our old grief, those griefs that won't leave us alone, despite how many years of therapy or yoga or meditation or addictions or 12-step meetings or marathons we complete, or bottles of gin. Our old griefs return to us. And if you're 14, you've already been on this earth long enough to get some serious grief mileage. A broken heart, a broken home, a broken body, a broken spirit. And sorry to break this to you, dear teenager, but if your life has been grief-free so far, and we know that that's not even true, I can assure you there is more to come. So for me, personally, what do I do with my grief? I'm going to ask some of you young people, what do you do with your grief? What do you do with your suffering? Bottle it?
Bottle it up and then save it for later.
Yeah.
Which is not healthy, but it's just, I've gotten used to it.
Yeah. And I think that that's what a lot of people do. They bottle up their suffering, and then does it come pouring out at some point?
Not really. I just learned to control it. But when I go to school, like that's where I'm like happiest, because like I see all my friends, and not you. I'm kidding, but I get to see like all my friends and stuff like that, and it just makes me really happy.
And it makes you happy. Yeah. One of the things that I do with my suffering and with my grief is I turn it into poetry. I tell the story of my grief or my rage, and I let that story spill across the page. I let the passion, the suffering, the old grief out to play, to run rampant across the stage. I use poetry to purge the passion and the grief, to reach across the page to the reader and say, I feel like this. And sometimes the reader or the listener hears the poem and says back, oh yes, I recognise that feeling. I feel that way too sometimes. So I'm going to read you one of my own poems from my book Fale Aitu, or Spirit House. And it is about that old grief. It's called This is a Photo of My House.
It's on the handout.
Oh yeah, it's on the handout. This is a photo of my house. It has pink bricks and a big tree. This is the driveway. You can lie on it in the summer. It keeps you warm if you are wet. This is the screen door. Swallow. Front green door. Hold your chest. The carpet is dark grey and hurts your knees. It doesn't show any blood. Here are the walls. Be careful of the small girl in the corner. Here is the door into the hall. Be careful of that too. Here is the line where the carpet stops and the kitchen starts. That is a different country. If you are in the kitchen, you are safe. If you are in the lounge, on your knees, you are not. Watch out for the corners. She isn't going anywhere. There is the piano. There is the ghost. Here is the hall. It is very dark. Here is the bedroom. Here is the other bedroom. Babies come from there. Here is the last bedroom. It is very cold. There is a trap door in the wardrobe. It goes down under the floor, and you can hide in it if there is a flood or a tornado. This is the bath. The auntie punched the uncle in the face till he bled. They lived in the small room, the cold one. That was before I was born. Here is the lounge again. Here is the phone. Ring the police, ring the police. Here is the couch. It is brown. Watch out for the man. He is dangerous. Here is the beginning of the lino in the kitchen again. Here is the woman. Watch out for the girl in the corner. She is always here. There is the woman. She just watches and then she forgets. I am cutting a big hole in the roof. Look down through the roof. There is the top of the man. You can't see his face, but see his arm. See it moving fast. I am removing the wall of my bedroom. Look inside. There are the spirits. That's where they live. Stand outside in the dark and watch the rays come out through the holes. Those are the people's feelings. Oh, thank you. So old griefs. How do I use my own griefs? What do I do with them? Let me invite you to the inside of my own head for a minute. This is one of the grief places I can visit. It's not a nice place, but it's a place many of us, women often, everybody really, experiences. Nobody loves me, will ever love me. Love will always leave. I should be grateful no matter who offers, no matter where it comes from. Brown girls like me, brown girls who grew up in a small white town where there were no shapes I could fit my big brown body into. The shoes that my teenage feet hobbled in, like the ugly stepsister who cut off her toes, because princesses aren't Samoan girls with size 11 feet. Better, I've got size 11 feet. Yeah, I know. Better to cut off my toes. Hide the blood and shuffle. Learn pain as a way of life. Learn smile over pain. This big brown body used to sew dresses when she was 16, rather than brave the stores in my small white town and see the faces that told me, there is no place here for you. You don't look like us. There is no place here for you. Elizabeth Barrett Browning was a Victorian woman poet who, in the time when it was beyond difficult for women to be recognised in any field of endeavour, she stood with the major league of male poets, Tennyson and Wordsworth and the like. This was no small feat, not size 11 feet. Anyway, so in a time when women couldn't even breathe freely, their poor bodies were forced into whalebone corsets. So you all know what a corset is, right?
Yeah.
So you know, in those days, they made corsets out of whalebone. They put bones from whales into the corsets. And I don't know if you've ever seen those movies where you have like a maid lacing up a corset and they get the woman and they stick their foot on her back and they pull the cords really, really tight. So imagine that, right? Being laced into a corset made of whalebone. You can't breathe. How can you breathe? If you've never been tied into a corset, give it a try. It's painful and it's full of panic. Because what happens when you can't breathe?
You die.
And you die. You do die. At some level you die. You definitely panic. There's a picture on there of a crinoline. Do you pronounce it crinoline? Crinoline? Crinoline. you know, our vowel sounds in New Zealand are slightly different. So in your handout, you have a picture of a crinoline. And that was the big thing that they wore under their skirts to make their skirts stand right out like that. Now, that particular crinoline was made of steel. Can you imagine having the top half of your body laced into a whalebone corset and the bottom half of your body encased in a steel cage?
No, thank you.
No, thank you. But that was the deal for Victorian women. That was the deal for women of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's time. So it was like a walking prison, right? So in that walking prison, and in the prison that was Victorian society for women, it was damn hard to be a woman, to be able to breathe, to be able to walk, let alone be successful in a literary career. But with all this, and with an ill body, a body in pain, a body often sequestered in her upstairs room, Elizabeth Barrett Browning continued to write like a boss.
You go.
Yeah, she did. Okay, line 9 to 10. I love thee with the passion put to use in my own griefs and with my childhood's faith. I love thee with my childhood's faith. The child that I was before all my own griefs. The child that I was who possessed that childhood faith. Do you remember? Do you remember your childhood faith?
Yes.
So, do you remember yourself before those old griefs?
No.
You don't. Okay. Well, I don't remember much of that child either, but I do have a few little memories from when I was 3 or 4. In 1969, when they landed on the moon landing was beamed into our cold sitting room on a cold night, under a blanket, on a scratchy oatmeal-coloured couch, watching a big wooden black and white TV with my father. No grief then, just the trust and the faith of a small child in a big brown man with a face as high as the moon. The very small Tusiata, burrowing into a bed in the middle of the night between my parents. My mother's warm back, my father's warm back. I used to shuttle back and forth between those two warm backs, those two warm pillars in the cold of a Christchurch night. My childhood's faith that all was well, that love was available and warm, even when it was sleeping. So, I love thee with the passion put to use with my childhood's faith. This is the love song to myself, that despite all my own old griefs, despite my suffering, before anything went wrong, that faith in the love that I possessed, that childhood faith, that is the faith that these words encourage me to connect with, because it is there in the moments that I'm not crowded by old griefs, when I can be like a child and not subsumed by the past. Line 11. How are you doing, guys? Yeah? Do you feel like you need a little bit of a stretch or a breathe? Yeah. Take a breath. Take a breath. Take a stretch. I know, it's long, eh? It's long. Okay, we're gonna polish this up fairly soon. All right, line 11. I love thee with a love I seemed to lose when I lost. Sorry, I love thee with a love I seemed to lose with my lost saints. I can love with a love I seemed to lose with my lost saints. The grief of loss, the loss of one's saints, those things that bring meaning, divine love, higher purpose, the ability to see beyond the old griefs. I remember as a small child sitting on the floor in my bedroom, speaking to the Virgin Mary as if she was my deity, which is strange because I was not brought up as a Catholic. But I was really taken by the images of the Virgin Mary. And I used to hold my own made-up ritual in my room, communicating with the only goddess I'd ever seen or heard of. I remember the light that seemed to enter the room, my awareness of some divine female presence. My childhood discovery of Mary didn't stay with me throughout my life. I lost her at some point, as we all do, in the passion of life, but it heralded my later discovery of a goddess closer to my ancestral home. Her name is Nawhanua, and she is the Samoan goddess of war. So I'll tell you the little story about Nawhanua. Nawhanua was born as a blood clot, a clot of blood. She wasn't born as a full baby, and because she wasn't done yet, they dug a hole and they buried her in the earth, and she grew up out of the earth. She became the Samoan goddess of war, and she lived in the Samoan underworld. Now, her people in Samoa were enslaved by another people. It may have been the Tongans. They were enslaved by another people. And one of the high chiefs of the time, whose name was Ta'i, was forced by the enemies to climb up a coconut tree upside down. Now, I don't know about you, but climbing up a coconut tree upside down is a particularly difficult thing to do. And because in the islands we wear a lava, like a sarong, you try climbing up a coconut tree upside down, everything's gonna fall out. Which is quite a shameful thing. So he cried out to Nawhanua to help him. And she heard his cry. She heard his cry of shame. She jumped in her canoe and she went from the underworld to the upper world of Samoa with 4 magic battle clubs to wage war on those who imprisoned the ones that she loved. So there was a really decisive battle. Nawhanua stood on the battlefield. She was ready for war. And the wind blew up her breastplate. You all know what a breastplate is? Okay, so it's kind of like a shield that covers your chest, yeah? So the wind blew it up. And the men, because she was fighting an entire army on her own, the men, because goddesses can do that, the men saw her for what she was. They thought she was a man, but when the breastplate blew up, they saw she was a woman. She was a warrior woman. And they called that place that she stood Malai Olema, which means the place of shame, because she was a woman. But she shouted back. She called up an army of invisible insects, those tiny little insignificant things that we think have no power. And they fought beside her. They fought, they overcome, and she won. She became the ruler of the whole of Samoa. She made the rules. She established the traditional system of government that still exists today. Her refusal to accept shame, her refusal to give in to the perception of her as just a woman with bare breasts was something that she went through to teach us something. This is how we must defend ourselves. We must refuse to be shamed. When our protective breastplates blow up in the wind, when we are revealed as women in a man's game, or as any kind of minority or disenfranchised person. This is what she taught us. And for me personally, as a Pacific Island woman living in a vastly white majority country, as a woman who has had the day-to-day experience of my own chronic illness and pain, like Elizabeth Barrett Browning, as a woman poet in New Zealand, I keep writing. I stay alive. I write for myself. I write for other Pacific Island women. I write for other women of colour, for those of us who are underestimated. I write to claim myself back from the whalebone corsets, from the crushed lungs, from the iron crinoline, from the no room to breathe. From my sick bed, I claim my voice. For those of us who are relegated to the back room, the Pacific room, the upstairs bedroom, the sick room, I stand on the place of shame with my chest plate blown up, with my breasts hanging out, and I speak back, I shout back, I snarl back like a wild dog, a kicked dog, a half-starved animal. I howl and I use my passion, my pati, my suffering, my old griefs on the page and on the stage. I allow the spirits of my ancestors, my goddesses, my sister poets like Elizabeth Barrett Browning to come across time and space and culture and country and colour and privilege. The Samoan goddess who bared her breasts and called up an invisible insect army to fight by her side against the army of the powerful. There is another goddess I want to tell you about, and her name is Te Nesa. She is a slut. Yeah, you heard me. She is a slut. She is also a powerful goddess. And one thing that she does, if we're not getting the message, is she will, and this is true, you go to a village in Samoa and you do the wrong thing and you don't respect yourself, she will slap you across the face. And her handprint will stay there until, for as long as it takes for you to remember what you need to know. That you need to know to love yourself. Aloi ai, she yells, go and get them. She yells and all of the wild dogs scream and howl and snarl and cry and bite and whine and let go of the suffering of whatever is there. We open up ourselves to make way for whatever warrior woman or whatever warrior man needs to be heard. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, or Ngā Whanua, or Te Nesa, or my own old griefs, or your old griefs, or the old griefs of Tusiata, or the new woman who stands in her wake. Line 12 and 13. I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life. I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life. This is a challenge. This is the standard. This is the reminder to love myself, love yourself through every moment, every breath, every smile, every tear, every heartache, every suffering. From your first drawn breath to the day you breathe your last, to the self that transcends the body, to love the griefs and the joys. Elizabeth Barrett Browning advises us to accept the whole experience of my life, of your life. Everything that has ever happened to you, what is happening in this moment, and what will happen in the future. She offers me she offers all of us what all good poems do. A whole universe in 5 lines. And the next time I come to New York City, I'll do the other 9. So thank you very much for listening to me today. And for those of you who have never heard about Elizabeth Barrett Browning, I hope that you might go and check her out. Or if she's not your buzz, go and check out some other poetry. Because poetry is where you can do that. It's a good place. And if you're further interested in Wild Dogs Under My Skirt, my play is showing at the Soho Playhouse tonight at 7 p.m. and it goes until the 18th. Is the 18th Saturday, cuz? Yeah. So it goes until Saturday. And if you're 14 or 15 or 16, you come and see me and I'll get you a complimentary ticket, free ticket if you want to come. Yeah? Okay, so thank you again to the Browning Society. I'm very honoured to have been here. Thank you for your ears and thank you for your open hearts because I could feel you. And thank you so much to our kaumatua, which is the Indigenous word for our elder of 97. I want to honour you in my way, the way that we honour our elders. Thank you so much for being here and showing us all that we can be here. We can be here and we can be in the front row because that's where I'm going to be when I'm 97, in the front row. Yeah. Okay.
Do you guys want to have any questions for Tusiata?
Do you have any questions?
Yes. When you read this is the photo of my house. Did you refer to it as a poem?
Yeah. Yeah.
So my question is, when I heard you read it, and I was stunned by it.
Okay. Lovely.
It has a very
Love that.
powerful rhythm, which is what makes it a poem. But you chose to write it out on the page.
Yeah, as a prose poem. Yeah.
So why did you choose
Why do I do that? I think it's a little bit instinctive. And a little bit... all my writing starts as instinct, and then I have to bring my my poet's mind to it, you know. I can't remember why I did it like that. I think to make it this big block, this big unrelenting block, you know, with no space, because there's no space in there to breathe. I think that's part of the reason that I made it like that. Yeah.
Also on the page, it's the shape of a house.
It is the shape of a house.
It
It is, in fact, yeah.
Is this a standalone poem or is it part of a larger work?
Well, it comes from this book, Fale Aitu, Spirit House. So this is my most recent book. And all the poems are around houses in some way, but particularly houses that are full of spirits. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah. Just a comment. There is no commandment in the Bible to love yourself.
No,
There is a commandment to love your neighbor
that's
as
right.
yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that rather interesting because obviously to function and to be able to love someone else, you have to love yourself.
So I am commanding you all, love yourself.
Anyway, a Presbyterian pastor mentioned that too. Okay, you're right. But I wanted to ask you one other question concerning the Maui. Were the Maui displaced by the British, or was it simply that the British overwhelmed them when they migrated to New Zealand?
They didn't just overwhelm them. They shot them. They imprisoned them. They made them into slaves. They did what often happens during colonisation. So it was more than just there's more of us than there are of you. In fact, there was only a very small amount of British people, and the Māori were incredibly generous, and they basically said, yeah, come in and be our guests. However, they didn't invite them in to take over, and unfortunately that's the way it went, which is the story of colonisation very often. Yeah. Are there any questions from any of the young people? Yes.
When did you first start writing?
Well, I first started writing when I was 10. And for that reason, like big feelings, and writing was a good way of getting them out. But by the time I was 15, how old are you? 16. By the time I was 15, I stopped. Like I wrote a lot between 10 and 15. And then when I was 15, I kind of got the message from everything around me that brown girls like you don't become writers. You better stop that. You better bring your expectation of life down, And so I did. I stopped wanting to be a writer and a poet. I brought my expectation down, and I lived until I was 30, in my early 30s, doing other things, but never the thing I loved, And it wasn't until my beautiful cousin here, the very handsome man with the glasses, and you, darling, you're very handsome as well, who is a very famous playwright, Victor Roger, in New Zealand, and also the producer of my show. It wasn't until he introduced me to all his friends who were other poets and playwrights and artists and dancers and filmmakers and all those fabulous things that I thought, oh my God, if they can do it and they look like me and they're brown, maybe I can do it too. And that's what made me a poet. That's what made me go, I'm allowed to do this. So I'm telling you, you're allowed to do it. Whatever it is, whether it's writing or whatever, you're allowed. And look to the people like you. Look to the women like you. Look to them, and they will show you the way. Yeah? Yes, sir.
He says, if you are in the kitchen, you are safe.
Mm-hmm.
If you are in the lounge on your knees, you are not. Why?
Okay, yeah. Well, what do you think, people? Like, what do you think if you're on in the lounge? You know what the lounge is, right?
Like where you just chill out, right?
Yeah, it's like the sitting room. Yeah. So if you're in the lounge, this is a scary house, right? This is my childhood house. If you're in the lounge on your knees, what do you think might be going on? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. You know it. You're not safe. You're not safe. Yeah.
The kitchen is with your mother?
If you're in the kitchen with my mum, you're safe. Yeah. Yeah. He's darling.
The male is the aggressor.
I thought it was referencing the colonization of New Zealand by the British.
Yeah.
Because I thought you were referencing with the rooms and things like that, going from country to country as well. So I thought the lounge would be like what you said, the whippings of the people, and then the kitchen would be maybe your country.
You know,
before that?
I love that reading of it.
Good explanation.
It's a great explanation. And like I said before, whatever my meaning is, by the time it gets to you, you make that poem your own and you give it your own meaning. You read it in your own way. Just the way that I've read this poem by Elizabeth Barrett Browning and I made it my own, give it my own meaning. So more power to you, girl. Yeah, you keep making meaning. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
The world is full of sorrow, including, of course, yourself. However, there are some beautiful things in this life, in the
Deborah.
beauty of the earth. And it's important at times to let go the negative side of your life and seek the joy.
Yes,
It's very important to
absolutely.
let some of it go. Now you say that certain houses have spirits, indeed they do. I can feel the vibrations in a room, and that certainly is a spirit.
Are you an
And-
artist,
and
ma'am?
from that I can get a certain influence
Yes.
for writing and enjoying life.
I
I
th-
feel that there can be negative spirits and also very positive spirits. And the vibrations in a room, that proves that there is no such thing as a quiet room. All rooms have some kind of vibration,
They do indeed.
and much of it can be a very positive vibration.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Really.
So yes, there are the joys. I've kind of gotten a bit dark on it today, but there are the joys and we must embrace them. Thank you. How are we for time?